Hello there, Steve here in Sydney of the Gnosis website, truebluehealer.com, where you can get in just 20 minutes doing the beginner's tour physical evidence that your divine spark has been activated. You'll get some vivid messaging dreams and later on some physical signals to prove that it's not your imagination, that you have changed and your divine spark is unfurling within you, making itself known to you. It's particularly useful because it was going to help you literally copy and paste need to know keywords into your mind's eye, even the names of websites. This is to enable you to fight your way through the avalanche of mis and disinformation that is forever blizzarding in your face. Okay, so it's going to be the most important things you need to know for your personal life. Okay, truebluehealer.com, 20 minutes beginner's tour, all questions answered. I want to talk today about Australia's immigration and immigration generally, which is a subject which is, I believe, going to be re-examined in great detail by all the nations declaring their sovereign status, which is now happening around the world with a swing toward the right and the return of common sense and adult thinking, evidence-based thinking, as opposed to communist rhetoric. I'm going to tell you some things you probably don't know about the Australian immigration system, and it includes the fact that it's held up often as the way of the future, things to do in the Mediterranean, and it's praised by Nigel Farage, that sort of thing, skill-based only, that sort of thing. But I'm going to tell you how it started, what the intentions were at the beginning, and how it transmogrified into something becoming today almost injurious. So it's quite fascinating what compelled Australia to start migration, and they had no intention of multiculturalism. Okay, I'm going to explain how we got to multiculturalism. First of all, we start out with how do we begin here? Something you don't know about Australia would be one of their famous acronyms is called ANZAC, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, which was a combined military thing where British Empire countries went to the aid of the motherland, England, in World War I. 1915, you've heard about the Dardanelles and Gallipoli and the military disaster brokered by Churchill. They say there the Anzac spirit was born there. There's all this hubris comes out of it. Now let me tell you something about all these Australian Anzacs at 1915 Gallipoli. They were all Englishmen, all of them migrants, most of them not Australian born. So that's why they rushed out to the Dardanelles to die for their mother country. So it's a little bit of it's a bit misleading to think they were truly Australians, though they lived and worked here from an early age, from their childhoods. Now, if we just fast forward now to World War II, something pretty awful happened. World War II came along, and it became pitifully obvious that Australia didn't have sufficient population to maintain an overseas army in a war situation. It got so bad that the Prime Minister Curtin of Australia actually took Australian troops out of uniform in the Pacific fighting the Japanese, brought them back home to man the factories. The problem was that Australia had too many military volunteers and not enough people to man the factories back home. Australia actually had more people in uniform per capita than America, but we just didn't have the population base to sustain that over-involvement in warfare. So after the war, what do you think happened? The English people in Australia who had settled it decided to do something which was a kind of obvious short-term solution to what seemed to be a very urgent need. They started bringing out boatloads of English migrants. About the only proviso was you had to have a trade. You had to be able to do something to contribute to building the civilization here. And they did something very natural. They picked people of their own kind, their own language, their own culture, their own values, and they said, well, we are us, this is our country we're building, we want more people like us. That's the most natural thing for any ethnic group to do. I can't think of anyone else who prefers different ethnic groups to accompany them. Every nation somewhere has an essential originating ethnic group. So that's what Australians did. In fact, they were mainly English society, you see. Now that worked for a while, for a few years, and it was wonderful. The average English tradesman, who was pretty downtrodden and pretty poverty-stricken after World War II, what they did was you just paid 10 quid and you got a round-the-world trip that lasted 6 weeks, going to some of the most exotic places. You'd visit places you would only dream of visiting, like Gibraltar, Port Said, Aden, Colombo, places like that on the way. And you get this 6-week luxury trip on a ship. You would never be able to duplicate that again. And you arrived on the other side of the planet, and you're likely to get a job somewhere. You wouldn't be highly paid, but you could, with a lot of hard work, you could get a house and a car maybe if you were lucky. And that massive flow of migrants from Britain greatly benefited Australia and its settlement and its growth of 6 capital cities where everybody lives. Now what happened was, now that's the first cruelty, by the way, that we inflicted on another country. That is, we started stealing all their best trained people with a lifespan of work ahead of them. So we took all the young people newly trained by their industry, we headhunted them, took them to Australia, we kidnapped them basically. So we were doing some harm to England, the origin of the migrants. Now that's what all migration does everywhere to the Western world. You're taking the best and most trained people from third world countries that actually need those people to stay. So we've got to think about that, and we're continuing to do that to this very day. What happened was they ultimately ran out of British migrants. They just couldn't keep up the flow of British migrants. The ships were full of them, and so they started looking further afield through Europe. And not many French people wanted to ever come here. The culture was so different. Not many Germans came here either. A lot of Greeks and Italians came here. And from the Greek community, we got a kind of soft alarm bell about migration, that the act of migration actually causes damage to people. In case you don't know, migrants have a higher rate of mental illnesses, stress-related illnesses. Did you know that? In the case of the Greek community, did you know this? The second biggest Greek city in the world is Melbourne, Australia. More than 1 million Greeks live there, you see. And you'd say, well, they've been there 100 years, so they should be pretty well integrated, eh? And, well, not really. There's numerous comedy shows affectionately pointing out, and this has also been the subject of sociological studies, that Greeks living in Australia are so traumatised by living amongst Anglo-Saxon culture that they are excessively conservative, far more conservative than people back in Athens, where they come from. So not all people migrate happily and continue to function as well as they did in their native country when they go migrating. And there's many affectionate TV shows where they poke fun at Greek people, Greek Australians, because they have stuff like, her father's so conservative, she wasn't allowed out on a date till she was 32, that sort of thing. That's actually true and common. And there's a fair bit of mental illness in the Greek community caused by migration, but they tend to be very caring and keeping it to themselves. They look after their own people particularly well, it's been noted. But that's a little distant alarm bell. Now, why were they traumatised but other people weren't? The answer seems to be slight differences in culture boost the stress of some of the migrant population. So, and what they did was they went further east, they went through the Middle East, picked up more and more people there, and the cultures became more and more less European, more and more foreign they became. And eventually they started getting migrants from Asia, you see. Now, there is a problem with doing this. I've met 3 people in the last couple of months who told me, well, my mother told me first. She reminded me that other people believed it too, that no matter where you live and wherever you go, you still call the place where you were born home. I had, wait for it, I had a lady I met from Barcelona told me that Australia is a wonderful place, but it's a modern, clean, safe, and first world, first class country. But she said, I still can only call the beautiful city of Barcelona my home. That's the only place I feel is home, you see. I also heard that from a surprising person, a refugee from Somalia. And he said to me, yes, Australia is wonderful, clean, modern, all the usual stuff. It's, praiseworthy. He said, but I still think my war-torn Somalia is my home. So, and my own mother has said it to me 50 times, that she resents and regrets ever leaving England, and one part of England is home to her, and that's that. So we're doing trauma, we're traumatizing migrants when we take them out of their home countries. Can I point out to you that it's something like those salmon are capable of swimming the width and depth of the oceans. They always go back to the river they were born in to breed. And I suspect we get this feeling of home from some deep animal ancestry. There's probably some survival value in it. But here we are traumatizing just about every migrant who comes here. And we don't tell them in advance this is going to happen. And you also meet a lot of migrants who never feel at home here at all, and they nip back to the other country 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year, that sort of thing. They can never decide where they should be to feel right. So migration is not all a bowl of cherries for everybody. It's traumatizing, okay, for a lot of people. And my mother's never got over leaving the place that she called home 60, 70 years ago. Now, a bit of history here. In case you don't know, Australia, the six colonies federated in 1901. And the main reason for federating was that they thought they could coordinate their activities to keep the Chinese out. That was the goal of federation, the main stated goal, publicly stated in newspapers, etc., media of the day, to keep the Chinese out from just setting up massive cities anywhere they chose, anywhere they pleased, you see, because we didn't have the ability to stop them, you see. And the experience of the goldfields was that Chinese worked harder, longer hours, worked harder, and made more out of gold mining than the European miners, you see. Now, let me tell you that. That's just a fact I'm telling you. Let me tell you, I've discovered it's true. Building a house, I employed some tradesmen, and I noted the work efforts of various ethnic groups. And I noticed that Chinese tradesmen are essentially smaller than us, but they work harder, longer hours, and they eat less food and consume less liquids. That's something I noticed comparing Chinese tradesmen with other ethnic groups. So the Chinese are a problem wherever they go to everybody else. So that was the reason for the federation of the 6 Australian colonies in 1901. So what happened was that being as they ran out of the people they wanted, the original stock they were demanding, they started getting people more and more culturally removed from their own English way of life. And people from all over. 1970s, we had Vietnamese people from Vietnam. The Americans had that big war thing going on there. And they came here in boats. They were treated as heroes. And they tended to enclave in suburbs. And there's a place called Cabramatta in Sydney. And you'll notice the culture there is preserved. They have water buffalo statues, pig statues, because they're essentially an agrarian country. And when they live next door to you, they're a nuisance because they have goats and they have chickens crowing at 4 o'clock in the morning because it's just like home. It's a bloody nuisance. I've got chickens crowing at 4 a.m. on both sides of my house. The council have had to come and actually remove goats from one side of my house from Asian neighbours who think everything should be like the home country here. It's something that migrants fail to understand, that you really got to live with our culture. We are suffering because of other cultures being thrust upon us. It's a bit of a nuisance sometimes. That's a small problem I've had. If you go to Cabramatta, you'll discover something distinctly cultural that you wouldn't even think of in the beginning. You can't buy a cup of coffee, they don't drink it. Nor do they drink Coca-Cola. Possibly because it's American, I don't know. But that just shows you. And I don't think I've ever had a Vietnamese person ever talk to me and start up a conversation for no good reason except that he's facing me or he makes eye contact. It's never happened. Other ethnic groups do, but Asian people tend to avoid eye contact and only speak to you when it's necessary. That sort of thing. So they're enclaving in a place called Cabramatta and some adjacent suburbs, and they're very hard-working people. They're famous. They're quite famous for their hard work ethic, that sort of thing, and their scholastic achievements, that sort of thing. So I guess you can't complain too much about that. But because of those sorts of things, and a certain ethnic group started lobbying our immigration authorities to say, you have no right to pick and choose who you want to people your nation. You should take everybody on the planet, because if you don't, you're racist. There's a certain ethnic group maintains that line by lobby groups all around the Western world. And basically the rule is that you have to take cannibals, you have to take pedophiles, child molesters, criminals, because they all have basic human rights and they're all out of Africa. Obviously that is wrong, but that has predominated and got us in a situation now where we are being balkanized. Modern technology is enabling people to come here and live in an enclave suburb with free phone calls home, pay TV from the home country and cheap airfares, so that it's possible to live here and never see 1 hour of Australian television, never leave your home suburb, that sort of thing. It happens a lot in Australia, and to my utter surprise, Lakemba came up in the international news. Lauren Southern was here with Stefan Molyneux and from Canada, and they were talking about multiculturalism, ethnicity and all that jazz. And she was told to go to, Lauren Southern was told to go to Halden Street, Lakemba. Now I've been there hundreds of times, had dinner there, lunch there, walked up and down the street, been in the Islamic bookshops. Yeah, there's Muslims there from the Middle East, but there's lots of other nationalities too. Koreans and people like that. They only deal with their own ethnic community. You notice that, but I never had any problem talking to anybody, except them not knowing English in every shop that you go to. That happens in a lot of places in Sydney now. That's a bit annoying, because they basically turned Sydney into another Singapore where nobody behind a counter speaks English. And I've actually had to hold up a phone with a picture on it to say what I want in my own great city of Sydney. So I find that a bit irritating. And I think maybe multiculturalism's gone too far. Once upon a time, you'd come here from England to Australia and you were marooned here. You couldn't go home, it cost too much. It was the other side of the world. Now you can live here like you're sort of camping here and get free holidays home to the home country, free phone calls and pay TV and all that sort of stuff. And you're not ever going to become part of Australian culture. This is not what the original Australian government intention was in the late 40s, early 50s, to produce more Australians by importing more English stock from England. That's how it started. But more and more disparate cultures have now been included. And we've missed some pretty obvious things. So one of the cruelties we've inflicted on everybody else is stealing a lot of their trained people, their most educated people, um, the young people with the most potential. We steal them, we headhunt them. Are we doing the rest of the world a favour, or are we being subsidised by the rest of the world? Employers tend to import people already trained in another country. Education's very expensive, so we're actually being subsidised by poorer nations than us. Is it the right thing to do morally? Probably isn't. And something else we've had a problem with is the rising cost of living, because everybody wants to live in just 6 capital cities. So we have a house where I'm living is worth $1 million. That's the basic price of a house in Sydney. The cost of living is so high that people were having less and less children just so they could afford to live here. And the other factor that happened was this strange idea about equality, and we all have to go to university, we all have a right to go to university, has resulted in producing a couple of new demographic groups where you get, and I'm guilty of this myself. My niece asked me, what should I do for a career? And I kicked it around for a bit, and I just said, well, you could try being a pharmacist, because you'll always get a job being a pharmacist, right? So she dutifully did that, and it came out well. She passed with honours, master's degree, blah, blah, blah. Got a job in the pharmacy shop, and now she's got a medical salesman's job, and she's earning a fortune, but there is a little problem. She's so educated, she can't stand uneducated people anymore. She's 29 and her eggs are drying out. And she can't get any partners. She can't get any partner. She hasn't seen anybody she likes at all. And she says all the doctors she meets are just boring bookworms. So she's worked her way, with my help, into a demographic dead end, as far as I can tell, because there's a lot more women getting degrees these days, and they can't find men of their own intellectual level, so to speak, education level, to live with them. So as women get educated, birth rates drop. So maybe we have to rethink society altogether and give up on this equality thing, and maybe women's primary use could be, well, having babies? I don't know. Now, another surprise demographic has popped out. So impossible for young educated women to find useful partners. That a new demographic has been generated recently. It's been noticed. Artificial insemination, and bring up the baby at home as a fatherless child with mum and dad. That's university graduates are now doing this, and it's just going to increase the woes of society with lots and lots more father deficient children being produced. And that's because we fell into this stupid idea of equality, and we're all equal and we all have a right to be part of the elite and go to university. When for years now it's been said in Australia that degrees don't really deliver high income. In fact, they deliver you into a vast amount of student debt. And so we're doing ourselves damage with everyone going to university to study subjects that don't earn money. They are not vocational subjects. So all this affects our migrational needs. Bringing in other people of disparate cultures isn't the smartest thing to do, because it's not what we originally intended to do. And it's even in newspapers today, people like Peter Credlin, the former advisor to the Prime Minister, Mr. Tony Abbott, she's complaining about overcrowding, literally traffic jams in streets caused by 200,000 migrants coming to our cities every year. We get 1,000 people a week coming to Sydney, and we can't build houses quick enough. We can't build the infrastructure quick enough. So migration is becoming a bloody nuisance to us. Some politicians have been shouted down for saying maybe we should reduce immigration, because it seems to be a great thing, but the whole society is changing. It's being balkanised into 156 ethnic groups that don't talk to each other. It's something you notice, it really is. And it's not what the original immigration authorities wanted to do with Australia. It didn't occur to them to encourage Australians to have more children. It just didn't happen. And I think the Western world may have to going back to doing that, producing its own people with gusto, rather than headhunting other countries, which is morally wrong anyway, and just relying on other people, other countries, training tradesmen for us. I'll give you a clue how much tradesmen can make. Building a house. Gyprockers can make $10,000 a week. Okay? You will not get that. Gyprockers are the people who put the drywall white panelling on the brick walls to make the inside of a house look nice. I'm not sure what you call it in other countries, but it's a white plasterboard and it's hard to install, it's physical, and you can make 10 grand a week easily, and you can still get paid cash, so you can do pretty well there. It leaves university careers for dead, but they can't get enough people to do it because everybody's been told that it's so great to have a university degree. It delivers you into a lifetime of debt. Yeah, that's how off the rails a society can get. So I would suggest we start reconsidering immigration all over the Western world. I think every sovereign nation will have to go back, reevaluate the fundamentals, and I'd like to just reiterate what the Hungarian foreign minister said. It's about time people woke up to the fact that immigration is not a fundamental human right. And many countries in the world have no migration at all. China doesn't have any. You can't migrate to China. So that's that. So the Western world could adopt the Chinese method of just no migration. It's a possibility that we all have to consider what's best for our long-term survival as a society. Can I just say something else about Lauren Southern's visit? I was astonished that she's walking down the street and the press tried to make a complete fool of her, saying her visit was a complete disaster, a big nothing burger, actually a public relations flop, that sort of thing. She got a right panning in the Daily Telegraph. But inadvertently, the local police produced a high-ranking police official to confront her and say that this pale white blonde lady was a threat to public order, words to that effect, I'm paraphrasing, and he said it in front of a camera, and he said, you take one more step toward the Lakemba Mosque and you'll be arrested for disturbing the peace. Brackets, just like Tommy Robinson. Now that astonished me. It really astonished me. I don't really think the people at Lakemba Mosque could care less whether one blonde lady went to the mosque or not. She probably wouldn't be allowed in. Women are not supposed to go there. They are men's places only. But I don't think, I think she'd probably be liked by a lot of men. But it really surprised me that a high-ranking police official came, and even though there was no rioting, he was making up scenarios like there could be riots, could be looting, burning, buildings burned to the ground, or all kinds of shock horror things might happen. So if you take one more step, Miss Southern, 23-year-old Miss Southern, you'll have to be arrested. Brackets, like Tommy Robinson, which she is very well acquainted with. So I was appalled at that. So it was basically the police are protecting ethnic groups, protecting Australian suburbs against other people, really sort of emphasising the enclaving, which is not so obvious to me when I've been to Halden Street, Lakemba, plenty of times. But the police made it very evident that they are highly conscious and protect the kind of the fortress suburb mentality that we only thought was overseas. It has really surprised me. I'm deeply disappointed because, yet I can tell you some more things. All you saw was two people in burqas near an ATM machine, right? Let me tell you a couple of other things. In Halden Street, Lakemba, there was an ATM machine where people on benefits, pensioners and local businessmen, through the ATM machine, donated, wait for it, $20 million to ISIS. Okay, took the banks more than a year to notice. Okay, and the policeman's there defending the suburb that did it. Okay, in an adjacent suburb where I used to live with the same ethnic group in it, called Greenacre, it was not unusual to hear the sound of machine guns. There was a drug gang from the Middle East with machine guns. They even had a rocket launcher, an army rocket launcher, and they were going to take out some suburban house or a drug dealer rival or something. And the only reason they didn't hit the house with a rocket launcher was it was made of fibro materials, not much stronger than gyprock, and the armor-piercing missile would have gone straight through and hit some innocent house or building or something. So the drug gang decided not to do that, not to use the rocket launcher against a drug rival. But that's happened in adjacent suburbs. So we've got all that from Middle East criminality. We have Middle Eastern bikie gangs dealing in drugs. Vast sums of money are involved. So we do have a lot of problems with imported crime rates of foreign ethnicities. And one of the big red patches of that would have to be Lakemba. So what the policeman's doing defending all that, I do not know. And I don't think a 23-year-old pale-skinned blonde lady is really any kind of threat at all to that Middle Eastern community. It's just plain ridiculous that the policeman thinks they need to be defended with trumped-up charges against an overseas visitor, for goodness sake. So I'll let you go now for the second time.